Thank you all for coming today. Today I'm very excited. We're going to celebrate an artist posthumously. And the artist is Orville Dillingham. And today, because he won't be joining us, we're going to have his daughter join us. And daughter and also the owner of the art gallery that it's now hanging in, the Tronson Art Gallery. Tere Tronson, could you join me, please? Thank you so much for joining me. Shall we have a seat? And I'm just going to jump right in here because we've got a lot to cover. Your dad, you grew up with a father, such a acclaimed artist. So tell us a little bit about him.
Well, my father was born in Iowa and wanted to move west after he went to school and learned some things about art and ended up in Southern California for most of his career. Mm-hmm. So taught at the University, Long Beach State University, and so he painted his whole life from the time he was a teenager, pretty much up until drew and painted and did art until he was in his 80s. Mm-hmm. So
it was quite an evolution in his art too. As I walked around, you could follow the years almost. Which was kind of fun. He also hung in some pretty major galleries too, didn't he? He had some showings in some.
He did. He showed at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. He also taught at the University of Minnesota, where he was the first he was the first person to receive a Master's of Fine Art at that college, University of Minnesota.
Wow.
Bravo, yeah.
Very impressive.
So he and my mom met at art school, which was in Minneapolis, mm-hmm. and it's now called the Art Institute. And but then the war kind of stepped in between things. My dad enlisted in the war, and in World War II, and so his education was interrupted for the 4 years he was in the overseas. But when he came back, he went back and went to college and finished and got his master's. So.
Yeah. So he had his artwork evolved almost decade by decade. Mm-hmm. I noticed that the decades changed in themselves, and I was pretty excited about the way that Tronson Art Gallery hung these particular works of art. In that, right behind me, I think the art was 1957, mm-hmm. and we'll get a shot of that later. But it is a little more abstract, even though there are objects, but it's a little bit more impressionistic. And then moving to 1960, right behind you, things start to take a little bit more defined mm-hmm. shape, mm-hmm. and the outlines become sharper. And then a few years later, I think this was 67, it's very acute. He has the art is very, that not only takes shape, their details are mm-hmm. phenomenal. So it was kind of fun to just, mm-hmm. When I was thinking, wow, we're going to sit here mm-hmm. amongst this to see a range of art. Mm-hmm. And the wonderful thing is that it even is beyond this. Mm-hmm. My understanding is that he started out as an abstract painter. Is that correct?
Some of the early works in the 50s were more abstract, more expressionistic, and he moved through a variety of styles until actually toward the end of his life he also kind of returned to some of those more abstracts and did a lot of abstracts mm-hmm. At the very end of his life. So it's kind of interesting that he cycled back to those things. He got he painted in oil for most of his life, but he also got interested in printmaking late in his life, and so I think doing some woodcuts and doing some of the printmaking got him more interested in more expressionistic, darker, heavier lines, and then he kind of moved to some more abstract things again.
Yeah, it was kind of fun to walk around here, and I'm sure you apparently have 1,500 of his paintings. It's even a wider range. But even late in life, he was still evolving as an artist. And a couple articles I read about him. One, he even dealt with the oncoming Alzheimer's through his art, and his art had to accommodate that. Do you want to talk about that at all? Or?
Well, I think my father was very interested in learning pretty much his entire life. That was interesting to him, was to keep experimenting and learning. When he was first teaching, and he taught in St. Cloud in Minnesota before he came out west, they assigned him to teach photography class as a part. He's a painter, he taught painting and drawing, but they said, we need you to teach this photography class. And I remember he said, I really didn't know much about photography, but he was interested in it because he had always taken photographs. And so for him, he said what was interesting about teaching was being able to learn. If he couldn't continue to learn something new, it really wasn't something that he wanted to do. He wasn't the kind of teacher that would pull out the dusty old notes from last year and just do the same things over and over again. Every year for him, his art and what he was learning was what was interesting to him. So although he was an art professor and did that for over 30 years, he painted on his own in the evenings and summers, weekends. He always had his own work out in the studio. He'd go out there and do different things. So he was always interested in learning new things and in looking at things with fresh eyes. So one of the things kind of interesting is that painting of the table, that particular table, he painted many times. The same table, but it looks really different in the different paintings because he saw things, could see the same thing differently. He took walks around the same neighborhood they lived in for 60 years in the same little house in Garden Grove, California. But he was always seeing different things. So he'd come back from his walks and he would write poetry, or he would write reflections about something that he saw or that he was thinking about, or things that he, was interested in. And so I think that theme of learning and changing just went through his whole life. So his time late in life when he began to show some signs of having Alzheimer's, it was a little difficult to actually determine because, for example, his doctor would say, he's fine, he's so articulate. He knew a lot about other artists. He studied a lot of things. He always had stacks of books. He checked out literally stacks of books from 4 different libraries because being a professor, he could check out from the college, he could check out from, there's about 4 different libraries he'd go, and he'd come home and always be with lots of books around, and he would read them and talk about them. And so he's very knowledgeable about other artists and very interested in what other people were doing. And so he could converse quite a bit on all of these subjects, even when some of his memory maybe was starting to already suffer. So one of the analogies I sort of had for my father was he had a very active mind, kept his mind very active, and it's almost like if you're on the main roads and you drive, it's really smooth driving, but then if the main road is closed, you have to go down the sort of bumpy side roads. So that's what he would do. With Alzheimer's, you lose some of the connections in your brain. So you could see him at times sitting there trying to think, and he would figure out another way to get there. So then he would seem okay because he figured out alternate routes to still function. So as far as his work, I don't know that it was influenced by Alzheimer's so much that, because you might think it was, but even as a young man, and there's something he wrote about this, he said something about, I thought maybe the subject matter changed, but I always have been interested in, some of the same topics about life and death and what those things mean. And so I think that continued as he got older. He might have had different reflections on those things, but he, at the very later stages, wasn't really able to paint, so he stopped doing that. And he did do collages later in life. We have some wonderful pieces that he did of collages, but he was able to do those longer because he could just look at color and assemble things. And he was a child of the Depression too, so you know, you don't ever throw anything away.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So all the junk mail was art material, and he would be like, look at this beautiful envelope, and it would be gold, and he would have all these things, and I'm like, that's beautiful, what is it? It's junk mail, you know. And when he went to London, he and my mom and my sister and her husband went to London, and he and my sister embarrassed my mom a lot because he created a lot of collages while they were there, but he was always picking up trash or ripping old posters off the wall that were all shredded. He just, oh, this is so beautiful. So he'd be bringing home all this trash in bags. So they were carrying plastic bags so they could put all the trash. They'd get back to the room, and my sister did it too. They made collages out of a lot of the pieces that they found around.
And do any of those collages survive?
Yes, we have some up on the wall over there. There's a couple from London that he did. And he wrote about this too, the fact that he was more interested in, I think he says, the trash in the back of the alley than he is in the perfect front yard. Whenever he did a lot of landscapes. He would sketch on site. But he would generally park behind and paint the back of the stores or the back of the buildings, or sort of the things that weren't necessarily meant to be seen by people was more interesting to him than the facade on the front. So,
As a daughter of the artist, did you always recognize him as an artist? You know, usually parents aren't revered as you.
I think he was an exception. I always looked up to my father. He was 6'4", so he was very tall. And he had a very nice, deep, resonant voice. And he was just such a kind, loving father. You know, he's one of these people that, even if you were in trouble, he was so gentle about the way he would chastise you, so that being his daughter was, you know, a privilege in so many ways. And he shared things he was interested in. He was always interested in who we were as people. He never tried to say, you need to be this. He was never the person who told you what you should do, although he had very deep convictions about things and a lot of beliefs in things himself personally that he would share with you, but he wasn't a person who told other people what they should do, ever. So I just admired him, and I thought of him as an artist. I knew he was a professor and sort of went to college and stuff, but what I thought about him was he was an artist, because that's who he was and everything that he did. He was able to look at things with such fresh eyes and be surprised and be interested. He was never bored, never. He always would be staring at something, and you'd be like, Dad, what are you looking at? Well, I'm looking the way the light is shining on there, you know, on the floor. Or.
And I read an article that said that it's been a treat to go through his work, in that you see pieces that you recognize the places, and you recognize the people that were in them. And so that was a big part of it too. Then you actually got to see from whence these pictures came.
Yeah, a lot of the paintings were things that I was familiar with, but some were things that I hadn't even ever seen, because they were stashed way in the back in the garage where they were stored for many years. So,
I understand Coco has a question or two. What do you got for us, Coco?
I do. Is there any digital archiving of his work anywhere, so where someone could see it as an overview of his work and his different styles, or any books that his work is in?
There is a book out front that has one of his pieces of work in it. My sister and her husband actually, while my father was still alive, cataloged all the work. So all the work has been photographed, and so we had the listing of the sizes and the medium and titles and things. He was involved on a website for a while, later in his life, that my sister did, but not really so much. There's a few things out there on the internet if you search his name, but he died kind of before that was really utilized as much.
So we don't have a website for it?
No, we don't,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
Do you have a favorite memory of your dad?
So many,
Oh,
really.
Coco, you scamp.
So many. One really wonderful thing is I asked my father a lot of questions while he was still alive, and actually I wrote questions and he wrote lengthy answers for me. So I have a lot of his writings of his childhood, just different things he thought about, and so I'd really would love to at some point put all that together. It's really interesting. But one of the stories that I remember, and it's really more about his family, my father was very interested in genealogy and studied the Dillinghams all the way back to they came over from England. And I was the only one who would kind of sit and listen of the kids to the John Dillingham and his father John and his father John and all the family stories. So I did get interested in his parents. But one of the things that I was saying earlier about what a gentle and kind person my dad was, my grandmother was the epitome of that, his mother. And I remember him telling me that once when they went somewhere, I think they were in an office or a formal place where they weren't normally in, and he and his brother were goofing around, making too much noise on the floor or something. And the way my grandmother would discipline them was she raised an eyebrow. So that was put the fear of God into my father and his brother, and they stopped immediately what they were doing. So that's kind of the type of parent she was, and that's the kind of parent my dad was. There was no yelling in our house. It wasn't needed.
Was there another?
Did he practice meditation as he worked or separately? Was there music involved when he worked?
I don't think he practiced meditation. He walked every day. He got so that he always took his walks, and I think that's something that he enjoyed. Then he would come back and write. Pretty much that's where he started writing poetry. Late in life, he started having a glass of wine before dinner. That was pretty fun to him.
Any music involved?
Music,
Did he
not
listen?
so much. Growing up in Iowa, he didn't have exposure to any of those things. But I do remember him telling me that he remembers with great excitement the first issue of when Life magazine came out, because it had pictures. So he remembers going and seeing the first issue.
But that does beg the question, what was his workspace like? Was it a room that you guys weren't allowed in? Or
They built a studio. They built onto our house so that our living room was bigger, and then we had a patio, and then he had a separate little building that was a studio with a concrete floor and just shelves with some objects that he painted and his easel and paints, and very basic, nothing fancy.
Did he ever explore other mediums like sculpture?
Yes, he did quite a few pieces he called constructions, made out of different materials, usually found materials or wood or cardboard. So he drew, he painted, he did watercolor, did oils, he did the sculpture, he did printmaking.
Very nice, very nice. Another question.
I do have a couple more.
Oh.
Did he have any other things he did as a pastime, or did he only paint?
Well, he studied genealogy and he read extensively. He liked to read novels, English novels, different kinds of novels, all kinds of books. Like I said, he had stacks and stacks of books, poetry and art books. We've inherited quite a few art books as well. And he went to galleries. He was very interested in other artists' work. We took a trip when I was a kid. Our whole family took a sabbatical, which I didn't even know what that was, but it was a long time in a small camper with 5 of us going to every museum and every gallery in the United States. Wow. All across the United States. We went to probably about 40 states or something. So he liked history. He liked studying. Yeah.
Do you anticipate the desire to sell any of his works in the near future?
Some of the paintings are for sale. We are going to have a few more for sale at the next Friday Art Walk in Springfield in September. So there'll be a few more paintings that are available for sale, yes. And we have sold some, and we will sell some more. We just have so many that we can't keep them all.
Well, it's nice to get them circulated out where people can see them too. So,
Right.
So
Right.
share the wealth, as it were.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, Terry, where might we be able to find your father's work online?
Well, one place you can look is that the Tronson Gallery of Contemporary Art does have a Facebook page. And so if you look up the Tronson Gallery of Contemporary Art, you'll see Orville Dillingham's work is featured along with the other artists that have exhibited here at the gallery.
Good. Actually, I look forward to checking out that page.
Good.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Well, I just got the cue from my producer that this has been it. Boy, this just went so quick. It's been
Thank
wonderful
you.
having you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing
Yeah,
your stories
yep.
with us.
All right.
And that's it. So anyway, this song's off my album Too Many Shadows, and I'm going to do this. I'm doing John and Russell and the Garden Variety Trio are going to be joining me at Vanilla Jill's, a ice cream, and I just found out they have you can get beer and wine there too. Ice cream parlor with beer and wine. That's scary stuff. So I'm going to be playing this there that night on piano. So I'm going to do a guitar version now, and if you happen to be there on Friday night, you'll hear it on piano. It'll be better on piano. That's the song. That's where I usually play it. Here it comes. I don't want to keep guessing. Oh, no more denials, no more confessing. Raise your glass, give a toast to one more shot of cold. No use being courageous. Let's finish this chapter and turn the pages. And when the book is closed, I'll have one more shot of cold. It's the nervousness in your laughter. It's the chip up on your shoulder. Give me one more shot of cold before I go. Big piano solo right here. Look here. It's the nervousness in your laughter. It's the chip up on your shoulder. Give me one more shot of cold before I go. For sweet love's epitaph, oh, chalk up the heartache and a couple laughs. Then on that lover's tombstone, write down one more shot of cold. Then pour me one for the road, make it a double shot of cold. One more shot of cold. Thank you. Thank you.